The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. I thought everyone was kidding about Sid. I thought maybe it was an elaborate prank started by my mother, perpetuated by my sister, and reinforced by my grandma, who was always poking fun at him. Your cousin Sid talks to a mannequin on his front lawn. Your cousin Sid collects wigs for his new girlfriend. Your cousin Sid is dating a sex toy, but the photos were what convinced me, particularly the one where Sid winked at the camera as he was kissing a bright white ear, an ear far too shiny and glossy to be human. It was part of a series of photos on Facebook labeled Anniversary. In each one, Sid was situated next to a figure he had blurred out in Photoshop. Him and the figure could be seen kneeling at a picnic, and then seated at a park, and then finally standing at his backyard, overlooking an orange sunset. The blurring had been done to protect her privacy, according to his comments. It was those pictures, posted so brazenly in the eye of the public, that made me worry for my cousin after all. I DM'd to ask what this anniversary was all about, merely trying to be polite. 10 minutes later I got his response. "Sydney, hey, good to hear from you, Gabe. This was Isabel and I's 13-month anniversary. We decided to share our most auspicious day with our friends and family as an introduction to our relationship. Me, congrats. I heard you might have been seeing someone. I hope they are nice. Sydney, Isabel is my pure and chosen. We are destined for each other. I sincerely hope the world can accept Yis's and I's love for each other. Me glad you found someone. Sydney, I have. I'll be honest, Gabriel. Until I met Yissi, my conception of love was all wrong. I was looking for the wrong thing. I feel like I'm finally mature enough to understand the part of me that has been missing. It's like my whole life has been a dress rehearsal for meeting Yis. And now that I am reborn anew. I have a clear understanding of life, my place in it, and the direction of the future. Isabel has revealed my greatest and truest value to the universe. And with her love at my side, anything is possible. Would you like to meet her? Me what? Sydney, we've been keeping our relationship low-key, but it's time that she met some of my family. You're the first to reach out. I would really appreciate it if you would visit. Then you could spread word of how amazing she is. It would truly do wonders to help convince my parents to visit Isabel too. Please, would you come visit us? Or Gabriel? I should mention it did not feel like I was talking to the Sid that I knew. The Sid that I knew talked about Pokemon, Marvel movies, and anime I'd never heard of. Sure, he was introverted, and sure, he could have some weird opinions, but he was really just a typically nerdy IT guy who mostly kept to himself. This monologuing and "oh, Gabriel" shit was all new, and honestly it was frightening. I was concerned he'd fallen for some new agey scam or cult or God knows what. So, out of familial obligation, but also morbid curiosity, I decided to agree. I promised I would visit for dinner in a week. It was a breezy hour and a half on the highway. Sid lived about 3 townships away, and as far as I knew, he was still renting that same basement studio space he had always lived in ever since he moved out in his late 30s. I remember how shocked his whole family was. No one thought he had the gumption. No one thought he had the self-reliance. But lo and behold, he had rented a whole 1,000-square-foot studio all to himself. When I pulled up in the driveway, I could see him pop up from around the fence. "Gabe, so glad you could make it." "Hey, good to see you, man." We clasped hands and patted each other's back. Sid was never much of a hugger, so I was surprised how hard he embraced me on this occasion. At first I thought it may have been a veiled plea for help, like he was desperate for something. But as soon as we let go, I saw his face. He was beaming, genuinely overjoyed by my presence. "She's going to be so happy to see you." She is going to love you." I smiled and tried not to be weirded out by the comment. Instead, I revealed the bottle of red and white wine I brought for the occasion. "I didn't know which you'd prefer, but I figured options would be, Isabel doesn't drink." "Oh, well, that's okay. I also brought non-alcoholic lager that I'm a big fan. Isabel doesn't drink." He looked at me, slightly annoyed, as if I hadn't heard him the first time. I wasn't sure what he meant by the comment, but then, after brief consideration, I believe I understood completely. "Right, of course. Isabel just doesn't drink." "No, not at the moment. But this is something that may change." I looked at him dead in the eye, to get a sense if he was joking about any of this. He wasn't. I left all the drinks in the car. We ventured to the backyard of the house, and there, with a descending stone staircase, I could see his entrance to the basement flat. Please don't mind Isabel's lethargy. She's been busy in the yard all day, so she'll remain seated for the next little bit. I wanted to laugh. This was already sounding so ridiculous, but I also wanted to play along, to see where this was going. So I simply smiled and nodded. As soon as I went through the door, however, my giggles vanished, replaced by a tight constriction in my chest. Sitting across the entrance was a person-sized porcelain doll. She was laying a little ragged, with eyes wide open, black pupils gleaming with a shine I had never seen. Something about seeing a doll that large I found immediately disturbing, as if there was a possibility that maybe a psychopath was hiding inside, pretending to be limp. As you can see, she's a bit zonked. Haha. Sid went over and petted her hair. Both of her eyelids fluttered downwards, like the rocking mechanism in any porcelain doll. "She'll be up in a few minutes. Just a quick power nap." "Of course," I said, and then darted over to the dinner table, which was littered with Warhammer figures. I seated myself facing away, trying to hide my fear of an oversized toy. So basically everyone was right. Sid is seeing a doll. Good Lord. "I'll start heating up the food." He grabbed a store-bought, pre-roasted chicken from his fridge and set it into the oven. His suite was the same disaster I saw when I visited 7 years ago. Soda cans littered everywhere, including on his unmade bed, bobbleheads and Funko Pops standing on every conceivable surface, including the wall-to-wall shelves that made me feel like I was inside some poorly run museum. The place was still very much Sid's, except now he had a giant doll on the couch. "So where did you find her exactly?" I cut to the point. Sid clicked some dials on his rice maker. "Isabel. I met her in the field." "The IT field?" No, just the big grass field, beyond the yard." I turned to look out his small basement window. Although it was lightly fenced off, Sid's yard connected with a large, grassy plain. City property, underground reservoir, I think. "So you just found her walking around, on her own, through the grass?" Sid Saturday across from me, picking up some Warhammer figures. "Yes, well, I was getting out to photograph my Tyranids in the bush, trying to recreate a scene where the Norn Queen summons her underlings to fight the 9th Legion of the Imperium. And before I knew it, some of my figures started to move on their own, like this." He put down a soldier, and I watched as it slid across the table, as if dragged by a magnet. The little space marine ended up by my hand. "What does this have to do with Isabel?" Then all of my figures started moving, surrounding me in a circle. It was unreal, and when I finally looked up, Isabel was standing there, overseeing everything. I lifted the tiny marine, inspected the underside of the circular base, then dropped it immediately. What the fuck? Beneath the figure's base was a pulsating black ouncy, jutting with countless spiky hairs. The hairs grabbed onto the table's surface and pulled the figure upright again. "I see you found them," Sid laughed. "The micrites." "The mic what?" "Everything in my house has them. Watch." Sid stood up and patted his leg, whistling across the room. "Oh, Pip-Boy." A yellow and blue bobblehead skittered across the floor like a demented spider until it was at Sid's feet. He leaned down and gave it a pet. "You mind tidying Daddy's bed?" The bobblehead bobbled. Then it scurried over to the sordid sleeping space. Black gunk tendrilled from beneath the toy's base, entering the empty pop cans and moving them away. Then, like a pair of disembodied hands, the ooze also lifted and folded the covers of Sid's bed. At this point, I was standing up by my chair, thoroughly freaked. Are they bugs? No, they're a part of Isabel, little essences of her. I turned to the sleeping doll, noticing her head twitch a little. You're saying Isabel is filled with them? No, Isabel is the Mycrites. I moved away from a Gundam figure near the table leg, not wanting to be near any toy whatsoever. I know it's a lot to take in. I was scared at first too. But you see, Isabel is just a person like you or myself. I gave him a look that said, you've got to be shitting me. Hear me out. Isabel is from a place where they're beyond the need of bodies. She won't say where, but I do know it's somewhere in the Pleiades star cluster. My jaw dropped further. So, she's an alien. Not quite. It's more like her consciousness has been uploaded to a colony of nanomachines. She's a person whose thoughts are now in a liquid robot that arrived here hundreds of years ago. Both my hands glued themselves to the top of my head. It was the most incredulous I had ever felt. Okay, you keep calling her a person, but all I've seen is black ouncy around your house. She's very much a single entity. The majority of the Mycrites inhabit that porcelain body. She's attached to it. And can you blame her? It's gorgeous. 19th century China, I think. As he said the words, I could see the doll begin to stir. Her arms lifted above her head. Was she stretching? I backed away, instinctively heading for the door. I was halfway there when Isabel suddenly stood up on 2 feet and stared at me. I flouncy. As far as I could tell, her head and limbs were made of porcelain, but her torso and joints were made of soft fabric, like any old Victorian doll. There must have been bucketfuls of those Mycrites inside, filling her with the muscle and sinew she needed to lift, move and blink at me with those glassy, cold marbles. Gabriel Worthington. Her mouth lowered and lifted like an antique puppet's. It is a pleasure to finally meet you. I was too afraid to turn my back now. My eyes were glued. Won't you be joining us for dinner? I've heard so much about you. Her voice sounded like what sand might sound like if it learned to talk. Dinner. Yeah. Ding. Ooh. Sid walked over to his rice maker and gave a thumbs up. How glorious. The rice is ready. I'll get the cutlery. You might think I sat at the dinner table because I was still curious, and that I was still trying to help my cousin by learning more about this otherworldly partner by understanding their relationship. But that was not the case. I sat at the dinner table because I saw a shadow drip off the ceiling and pool around the doorknob of the exit. I could sense that Isabel perhaps may not let me leave, that Isabel perhaps really wanted to have dinner with me, and that Isabel was someone I should work very, very hard to appease so that I could leave with my life intact. So, Isabel said, dividing up the chicken, Sid tells me you are married. Why couldn't your wife join us? I looked at Sid, who didn't seem to notice the question. He was grabbing Cokes from the fridge. Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Valerie is really behind on work, so she sadly couldn't make it. Isabel's glossy hands had articulated fingers. With each of her movements, I could hear the porcelain scrape on itself. She used tongs to pluck some of the chicken pieces and lay them on my plate. That is a shame. Does your wife often disappoint you? I stared at the meat on my plate, and at the deadness of her pupils. No, not at all. I love her very much. She just gets busy with her job. Isabel doled out the rice next. It was very eerie to watch a doll set the food, 2 large portions for the humans, and a tiny portion for herself. Sid tells me that he's had many women disappoint him, and that it's quite common in this day and age. An epidemic. I watched Sid as he handed me the Coke and smiled a little sheepishly. Well, I just think girls are a little too picky, maybe a bit mean. He swept some Warhammer off his chair before sitting down. None of them are as understanding as you, yes. He leaned over and gave her a kiss on her white, shiny ear. I shuddered internally. Do you think that's true, Gabriel? Are women disappointments? I had no idea what kind of answer she was seeking. For the record, I don't think women are disappointments, but I wanted to be diplomatic, because I got the sense she was siding with my cousin. Everyone's experience with relationships is different. I said, some people just have bad luck. Isabel brought a chicken piece up to her puppet mouth and lowered her jaw, revealing a tangling mass of micrites. Dozens of tiny black spikes skewered the meat and pulled it into her dark maw. "And do you know any of these people with bad luck?" she asked, chicken dissolving inside her throat. As a matter of fact, I did. Working in construction, I was surrounded by men who would voice their dissatisfaction with the fairer sex. Though to be honest, most of these men just needed to grow up or stop acting like assholes for these problems to go away. Yes, I know a lot of guys like this. You do? Isabel's eyes lit up. Something in her chest whirred. If this dinner was about placating this doll, this seemed to be the right track. Yeah, I said. It's prevalent at my work, in the trades. Isabel stood up from the table, mimicking the movements of a person rather uncannily. She picked up a box lying near Sid's TV and brought it over to me. It was filled with Hot Wheels, action figures, Warhammer, and other collectible toys. "Please," she said, "you must offer these men anything they want from this box, whatever they want." Sid took a sip of his soft drink, eyeing his paraphernalia. "But yes, those are pretty rare. I was arranging those for eBay." Isabel's hair began to lift and flutter a little, as if filled with static, as if a large charge of micrites had entered her head. I could tell Sid was as uncomfortable with this sight as I was. "I make you feel happy, don't I, Sydney?" My cousin wiped his mouth and practically bowed. Yes, of course, Isabel. You're my pure and chosen." "Then don't you think other men deserve to feel happy too?" The dinner only lasted about an hour. Isabel made me promise that I would place the box of toys at my work, which I agreed to. It seemed like a fair price to pay for allowing me to leave alive. I told everyone in my family that Sid was very content with his new partner, and after much consideration, I also told them the truth, that his partner was indeed a doll. Sid just does what makes himself happy. "Let Sid be Sid," I said. This resulted in the expected shock, embarrassment and ridicule between family members. No one wanted to contact my cousin after learning that, not anytime soon anyway, which I think was a good thing, because it protected Sid from humiliation. But more importantly, it also protected anyone else in my family from meeting Isabel, which was my real intention. I have no clue what sort of microbial slime tech Isabel was made of, or where in the universe she was from, but I certainly didn't trust her in the slightest. The burden I now carry is that I exposed some employees to her essence at my company. I left those colorful, valuable-looking collectibles in the lunchroom portable at my work site. I wish I could tell you they were harmless cars, Transformers and He-Man toys. But even on my drive home, I could see the shimmering black micrites hiding inside all those plastic playthings. I don't know what Isabel intends to do with the additional men she will ensnare. For all I know, she has other porcelain bodies to act as spouses. She might be enthralling hundreds of males to enact something awful, something truly horrific. But I'm secretly hoping they all just fall in love, keep to themselves, and play Warhammer or something. I first discovered the wreck a week ago, and I pray to God that I am strong enough to never return to it again. Already, I can feel something urging me to go back. I am a good man and will do my best to resist the temptation. I know already that it will not be easy. "What was all that about?" said Sarah, as we loaded our scuba gear into the back of our old pickup truck. I grinned, flexing my muscles playfully. "There is something down there." "Oh, please, you're not trying to pull one over on me, are you?" Her gaze lingered on my chiseled physique, a testament to years spent working in the dive industry as an instructor and course director. "I'm not kidding. There really was something. A submarine." Sarah raised her eyebrows and began peeling off her figure-hugging wetsuit, and I could not help but notice the admiring glances of a couple of younger passing tourists. I am sure she was aware of their lustful glances. She exudes an effortless sensuality, and exposing her tanned skin and skimpy bikini does not seem to bother her in the slightest. Stop kidding around. We have dived this spot 100 times at least. You know as well as I do that there is nothing down there. But she was wrong. It had begun as a usual Saturday for us, diving together as we often do. Sarah is not only my girlfriend, but also a talented photographer whose stunning images have graced the pages of international magazines. Her skill and professionalism have won her countless awards, and today she was intent on getting some shots of an invasive mantis shrimp species that had started to become more common in the azure waters around the Maltese coast. As we descended into the water, Sarah immediately began searching for the shrimp. She knew where they were likely to be found, but the search process was tedious. I followed along dutifully, watching her graceful form move through the ocean like a mermaid. However, after 10 minutes of this slow-paced exploration, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed a little more excitement. So I signaled to Sarah that I was going off on my own for a bit, and she gave me a playful wink before continuing with her search. As I swam away, I looked back and couldn't help but admire how she moved through the water effortlessly and gracefully. She was more than capable of taking care of herself in these shallow depths, but sometimes I couldn't resist the urge to protect and watch over her from a distance. As I descended into the familiar waters, the sun shimmered through the crystal-clear ocean, casting undulating diamond-shaped patterns upon the enormous blocks of rock littering the shallows. I gently finned over the lip off the drop-off at 20 meters and looked down. My attention was immediately drawn to a large, dark shape that seemed to lie upon the sandy bottom at perhaps 30 meters. Like a giant guardian of the depths. My heart raced with excitement as I moved closer, and my eyes widened in astonishment as I realized what the object could be. Without hesitation, I swam deeper, eager to investigate this unexpected discovery that filled me with a sense of both euphoria and fear. The German U-boat had presumably lain undisturbed upon the seabed for over 70 years, a haunting reminder of the past. Its once sleek and deadly exterior was now rusted and covered in algae, giving it a strange, ghostly appearance. As I dove towards it, a feeling of unease settled in my stomach. What tragic circumstances had led to its sinking, and what secrets were hidden within its flooded confines? At a depth of 30 meters, I would get through my air fairly quickly, and I also had limited time if I wanted to avoid decompression stops. But my curiosity prevailed, and I swam towards the stubby conning tower. Only then did I start to worry that the sub might contain dead bodies. What had happened to the crew? Had they been able to escape, or was their final resting place within the flooded confines of this steel sarcophagus? I know now that I should never have done what I did, but I could not stop myself. An overwhelming urge gripped me, and I peered through the open hatchway into the mysterious and dark interior of the wreck. Later, when I returned to Sarah's side, she was still absorbed in taking photographs and hardly acknowledged my return. Excitedly, I grabbed her arm and shook it, trying to get her attention. She gave me an annoyed look as I thrust my dive slate in front of her mask. After much signaling and insistence, she only read what I had hastily scribbled on its surface in pencil. I found a wreck. Understandably, she looked surprised, as we knew there was no known wreck within 5 miles. Slightly begrudgingly, she followed me towards the drop-off. I was leading and kept looking over my shoulder to ensure Sarah was still following. I could hardly contain my excitement as we swam over the ledge and looked down. Sarah gave me what I would call one of her looks, as I stared down at the seabed in disbelief. The U-boat had vanished, but there was something there. I saw it, I told Sarah later as we drove back to our apartment. You thought you saw something, she corrected. Maybe you were just knocked. It looked pretty deep. I suppose that could be it, I said. All the problems with Jurgen and the dive school must be getting to me. She smiled and ran her hands through her salty blonde hair. I'm thinking of taking a long shower when we get back, she said nonchalantly, before shooting me a suggestive glance from underneath her lashes. And you should join me. You really could use some stress relief. We both could. Sarah put the radio on, and we drove back to our beachside apartment. She sang along beautifully and harmonized with the songs on the radio, and I lost in anticipation of what was promised to come. As we pulled into the driveway and I killed the engine, Sarah hopped out of the pickup and headed for our apartment. "Come on, slow. Coach, let's wash off all that dried up salt together," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but vibrant with promise. "Perhaps we can find our kind of adventure in the depths of all that shower steam, shall we?" I grinned and followed her into the apartment. I did not mention that I had peered down the hatchway into the flooded submarine, or that I had explored its darkness. All the problems I am now experiencing with my dive school started about 5 years ago. As the price of exotic destinations dropped and more unique scuba diving destinations became available, my business slowed down. My customers seemed to have been lured away by the white, powdery beaches and waving palm trees of places like the Caribbean, the Maldives, and even Papua New Guinea. It was getting so bad that I swore that I would strangle the next diver I heard mouth that well-worn phrase, "The med is dead." Eventually, last year, against my better judgment, I took on a partner, Jürgen. He offered to buy half of my business and bring in lots of extra customers through his network of dive clubs in his native Netherlands. It seemed like the perfect solution at the time. To begin with, things went very well. After spending so many years of hard work building up my dive business by renovating an old derelict building on the coast, adapting a fishing boat, and paying for expensive advertising in glossy dive magazines, I was suddenly able to relax a little and let my partner take some of the strain. This turned out to be a mistake. Before long, almost 8% of our customers were from the Netherlands, and I was getting hardly any bookings from anyone else. Even when I did have some of my own customers, I got the feeling that they were less than happy that the dive trips were dominated by Jürgen's customers, who all seemed to know each other. Not too long after, Jürgen came to me insisting that he should get more than 50% of the profits as he was bringing in most of the customers. We argued about this constantly, and it even got to the stage where he threatened to sell his share of the business to someone, another acquaintance of his, and take his divers elsewhere. 2 weeks ago, Jürgen announced that he wanted to buy me out. After all these months of bickering, I was on the verge of accepting the less than fair market price he had offered me, but that was before I discovered the wreck. The day after I found the mysterious U-boat, Jürgen took a boatload of his customers to one of the local dive sites. Sarah was planning to review the digital shots of shrimp and edit some other work, but the deadline was rapidly approaching. Her little hobby, as she had termed it a few years ago, had become a real success. "Have a great day at the dive school," she said, giving me a quick kiss before hurrying off to the room she used as her office. I had no intention of telling her what my actual plans were. An hour later, I was passing over the underwater ledge and looked down. The wreck was there, just as it had been when I first found it, a hauntingly dark silhouette set against bone-white sand. I had not imagined it. The wreck really did exist. This time, I made sure that I was suitably equipped to allow myself a thorough examination of my discovery. As wrecks go, it was rather odd. It sat upright on the bottom, its ship-like bow slightly buried in the sand. I swam around it but failed to find any obvious damage, making me wonder whether the crew had deliberately sunk it. It just sat there, on the bottom, as if silently waiting, hidden in the depths until it was time to pounce. Reaching the conning tower, I gazed down through the open hatch. Surprisingly, there was little marine growth around the edges, and after clipping a guideline to the stubby radio mast, I went inside. My first impression was one of intense cold. I guessed that this might have been due to sunlight from above, being unable to penetrate the wreck to warm the non-moving water within it. As I played my powerful torchlight over the interior, a mass of pipework and sheathed wiring, I could not help but feel a sense of great curiosity. There did not seem to be any apparent reason for the U-boat's sinking. Due to the confined space, Moving around was difficult. I had opted for a small rebreather instead of traditional scuba to avoid the risk of my bubbles stirring up sediment, which could quickly reduce the visibility to zero. The rebreather also offered the considerable advantage of plenty of gas for a long dive and deco stops afterwards. Fine greenish sediment had settled on every surface, and even my gentle movement through the water dislodged fine rust, which rained down from above, reducing visibility to no more than a meter ahead. My torch, which is hugely powerful and one of the best on the market, seemed unable to penetrate the somber interior efficiently. It was as if the darkness had a substance of its own. It soaked up light like a sponge. Cautiously, I edged forward, going deeper into the aquatic mausoleum. The water around me felt somehow thicker, and I had the impression that I was swimming in treacle. The darkness increased. How could the inside of a submarine be so damned big? I had swum for what I considered a considerable distance, yet there seemed to be no end to the cavernous interior. After another 5 minutes of finning, I stopped. I figured that I must have swum a couple of 100 meters. There was no way that this type of sub could be so big inside. Hell, it wasn't anywhere near so long on the outside. It just did not make sense. The other and more worrying reason that I had stopped was fear. My light was almost useless. Examining it, I could see that it burned brightly enough, yet the darkness was somehow darker and hungrier. It was then that I noticed the smell. I know it sounds ridiculous, but that is the best way to describe it. It was as if I could smell something rancid, a rotting stench that I could taste through the rebreather's mouthpiece. I inched forward, my heart pounding in my chest and ears like thunder. The smell was almost overpowering. Suddenly, I came within inches of some kind of barrier, a wall of thick, undulating darkness. I sensed that the darkness was waiting. For what? I had no idea, but strangely, I felt sure it had been waiting for a long time. Don't ask me what made me do it. Curiosity, stupidity, who knows? Tentatively, I reached out. I watched as my hand disappeared, engulfed by the blackness. The pain was immediate and excruciating, a freezing coldness that penetrated the very bones of my finger and began to spread up my wrist and into my arm. I felt, touched pure evil. In horror, I screamed, snatched my hand back, and retreated as fast as I could towards the conning tower and its open hatchway. I did not bother to collect my guidelines. I fled for the surface in terror, up towards the light. I had no intention of ever going back after that first dreadful experience. For 2 days, I managed to pretend to myself that it had simply not happened. I began to wonder whether or not there might have been something wrong with my recollection of events. Perhaps I was the effects of nitrogen narcosis, though that is not something that has seriously affected me in over 30 years of diving. A distant family member is often described as not playing with a full deck. She spent some time in an asylum. I hope it is not hereditary. I had almost deliberately forgotten about the wreck until I mentioned it to Jürgen. Afterwards, I reasoned that telling Jürgen was an attempt to accept that I was not crazy and had indeed seen something. Of course, now I realize there might have been some other motive for telling him. From the moment I told him about the wreck, he was hooked. Where was it? How deep? Would it make a good dive for customers? It was the first time there had been any semblance of friendship between us for months. He insisted that we should explore it together. How could I refuse? As we descended towards the submarine, I watched Jürgen's face. When the ghostly shape of the wreck began to become visible, his eyes grew wide with excitement. He turned to me and grinned, then finned towards the conning tower. I followed. The wreck looked exactly the same as the last time I had seen it. A chill of memory shivered down my spine. Jürgen looked down into the wreck and then, seemingly on impulse, took hold of the guideline I had left last time and followed it head first down into the gloomy innards of the submarine. I did not want to go inside again, but felt grudgingly that I ought to stay with my partner. Inside, it seemed even colder than before. Jürgen was kneeling on the bottom, looking around with his torch, holding the guideline. He indicated that I should go first and that he would follow. I shook my head and signaled that he should lead. He shrugged and then set off, with me close behind. We swam for quite some time before Jurgen stopped and turned to me. He looked confused. We had been swimming for a ridiculously long time, considering the size of the U-boat. He appeared worried, but I gave him the okay sign, which seemed to be all the reassurance he needed. He swam deeper into the darkness. Nervously, I followed him. Not long after, I began tasting that revolting smell I had previously experienced. The apparent thickness of the water seemed to slow our movements tenfold, and the light from our torches withered to pathetic conicals of light. We had reached oily blackness. I have no satisfactory explanation for what I did next. Perhaps it was because Jurgen had virtually stolen my dive school from me. It might even have been that I simply did not like him anymore. Whatever the reason, it is sufficient to say that I pushed him into the blackness. Jurgen fell forward and was immediately engulfed. For a brief moment, I felt relieved, glad to be rid of him. Then all hell broke loose. His panic-stricken face reappeared through the oily film. His mask and regulator were gone, and he was screaming in terror. I could actually hear his muffled cries as vast bubbles of air spewed from his mouth. The darkness began to retreat deeper into the wreck, and it seemed to be dragging Jurgen with it. His arms flailed wildly, his fingers desperately trying to grab onto something. I could hear and see his fingernails scraping and splintering against the cold metal floor. Then he was gone. I felt no guilt, only a weird kind of revulsion. It was the kind of excited disgust that I had when, as a kid, I had peered into the gutter at the mashed remains of some poor animal, a cat, I think, that had been hit by a car a few days before. How long would this thing, whatever it was, be satisfied with one person? I wondered. I turned and left, ascending to the surface. I looked back down, half expecting the wreck to disappear. It hadn't. All this happened a matter of days ago, and since then, I have been haunted. I have been haunted by the ghosts of my life, people who have at some time caused problems for me, let me down and disappointed me. Since I have spent most of my life in the diving industry, it is not surprising that most of these people are also divers. It would not be hard to persuade them to explore a virgin wreck of a U-boat with me. It is a temptation that I must resist for the sake of all that is good. I am a good man. Over the course of my career, I have taught at 3 different schools, one as a student teacher, one teaching 6th grade, and now 2nd grade at what I'll generously call the neediest school in town. When I approached Charlie to give him his lunch, I caught a hint of an odd smell, one I didn't recognize. Fading cigarettes, unwashed clothes. I wasn't sure. Charlie, your mom never lets you come to school without your hair combed. I prodded gently. She hasn't been checking, so I figured I didn't have to, he said sheepishly. She told me to, but she didn't come out to look. Well, you should still make sure you do as your mom says, I replied. I honestly wasn't sure what else to say. I'd dealt with parents who drank too much, parents who couldn't afford to keep the lights on, and parents who vanished into thin air. But I wasn't sure what exactly to do about a mother who clearly cared, but had retreated into some kind of deep depression. My heart ached for the woman, and I wanted badly to speak to her directly. I couldn't keep playing telephone through this innocent boy, who knew exactly how much he understood of the situation anyway. I decided to send a letter home with him that afternoon. I reiterated almost exactly what I said in my initial call home, but added for good measure that I could arrange for Charlie to stay with a friend for a day or two if she needed time to herself, just to get composed. Charlie came in Tuesday morning with his hair combed and his clothes clean, but mismatched. He proudly showed me his 2 different socks. My mom taught me how to do my own laundry last night, he announced to me proudly. That's great, I exclaimed, offering a high five. Did you give your mom the note I sent home? I did. I put it under her door like you told me to. He beamed. So, she was still hiding away. I worried silently that she might not be going to work either, if she wasn't coming out to send her son off to school. Great job, buddy. I offered another high five. Charlie opted for a hug instead, wrapping his little arms around my neck. I couldn't help but notice, under the scent of detergent, the same smell as yesterday. I prayed that his mom wasn't slipping into a hoarder situation. I'd dealt with that before, and I didn't look forward to doing it again. Wednesday morning, Charlie looked like he hadn't slept at all. He'd been looking drained all week, but the dark circles on his round face kept compounding until that morning when he looked positively exhausted. Most of my current students, and my students for the last 4 years I've worked here, come from homes with struggling parents. Usually, both parents, that is, if they're lucky enough to have two, work one or more low-paying jobs, struggling to put food on their tables and send their kids to school with supplies. I'm no stranger to buying markers to hand out, keeping extra lunches in my desk, and, on more than one occasion, bringing clothes to school from the thrift store to keep my kids warm in the winter. I've found, over the years, that it's best to handle things on a personal level, rather than getting government services involved. In the early days of my work, I found that CPS intervention can frequently do more harm than good, and even parents who fail their kids are usually trying their hardest. I hate to see families torn apart, and I know that the foster system is a rough place to live. More than a few of my students have been foster kids, and I wouldn't wish that kind of turmoil on any 7-year-old. Even if the home situation is rough, most parents love their kids. I suppose that's why I took so long to meddle in Charlie's situation. Charlie was a generally well-behaved kid. Even though I knew his family was struggling, I got the gist from the parent-teacher conference that only his mother attended, that his mom was a kind lady, a little too young to have a 7-year-old, who worked hard cleaning houses to give her son a good start in life. His father, from what I surmised, was present in body only. Charlie came to school every day scrubbed clean, with hair combed, and his worn-out clothes mended meticulously, despite the fact that he smelled strongly of his father's tobacco. I doubted that his nervous mother, with her neatly braided hair and pressed housekeeper's uniform, was the one smoking enough packs a day to make that skinny boy reek like a line cook. The only time I had to call Charlie's parents, when he missed the bus home one day, the man who answered my call merely barked at me to make him deal with his mistakes, and slammed the line down hard enough to rattle my skull. I ended up walking the boy home that day, and met his mother in the driveway coming home from work. She was grateful I had seen him home safely, and quickly ushered him inside. I thought I saw the ghost of a bruise on her cheek, but I couldn't be sure. Either way, I watched Charlie like a hawk since that day, and never saw any marks on his little pale face. Isn't that how it often happens? That the mother takes the blows for her child? I never had any other reason to doubt that Charlie's mother was caring for him well, until he arrived late for the first time, on a Monday in February. He looked disheveled in a way I was used to from some of my other kids, but not from him in particular. I approached him at the beginning of first recess to ask him if everything was all right. "Sorry, Miss B. I had to walk to school this morning. My mom forgot to wake me up and I missed the bus. I'll be on time tomorrow." His little face looked tired, with faint purple circles under his eyes. I assured him that it was all right. I just wanted to check and make sure he was doing okay. He nodded quickly and ran off to join the other kids on the wood chip playground. As he had promised, he was on time to school the rest of the week. Nothing strange occurred until Thursday, when he shyly approached me at the beginning of lunch period. "My mom told me I could ask you if you had any snacks. There isn't any food in my house right now." "Of course. You can always come to me if you're hungry," I replied, making a conscious effort to keep my voice free from pity. "Is everything okay with you and your mom?" "Yeah, we're okay, I think," he answered quietly, focusing on his shoes. He paused a moment, before adding, "My dad left last weekend. I don't think he's going to come back this time." "I'm very sorry to hear that, Charlie." I put what I hoped was a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I'm always here to help you if you need a snack, or just somebody to talk to." He nodded solemnly. "Thanks, Miss B. It's okay. My mom just hasn't been able to go to the store this week." He accepted the PB&J I offered and ate with the other kids. I decided I should call home and see if I could offer his mother any help. Hopefully, with her hot-tempered husband out of the picture, she could get back on her feet quickly. I would try to offer all the support I could. My call went to voicemail. "Hi, Mrs. Collins. This is Miss Bell. I spoke to Charlie today, and I got the idea that there might be some changes happening for him at home right now. I just want you to know that I'll be bringing lunch to school for him tomorrow and Monday, and you just let me know if there's anything else I can do to help. Feel free to give me a call back, or send a note with Charlie if you'd like. I hope you two are doing well." On Friday at lunch, I gave Charlie a ham sandwich and asked him how his mum was doing. I find that with little boys especially, they're more willing to talk about their troubles if you ask indirectly. "She's all right, I think. I played your voicemail for her, and she said it was very nice of you to call home, but she has things under control." I was confused. "You played my voicemail for your mom?" I asked, keeping my voice light-hearted. "It's pretty cool that she lets you be in charge of the phone." "Yeah, she taught me to use the phone and my own alarm clock." He shrugged. "She said she heard the phone ringing, but she couldn't get to it to call you back." He paused for a moment, thinking about what he wanted to say next. "She's been shut in her room since Dad left." His words made me concerned, but I held my tongue. I've never had a husband leave me, even a deadbeat one, and the kids still looked healthy, even if a bit dirtier and more tired than usual. Besides, he was starting to smell less and less like cigarettes. "All right," I said, leaning back in my desk chair. "Well, your mom knows that if she needs anything, she can let me know." Charlie's words left a pit in my stomach all weekend. I even drove past his house on Saturday, against my better judgment, hoping to see signs that all was well. The lights were on, but I didn't see any sign of the boy or his mother. The only difference from the day I walked him home in November was the lack of beat-up green sedan in the driveway. Whether his mom was working on a Saturday or his piece-of-shit father took the car was anybody's guess. On Monday morning, Charlie arrived on time, wearing the same clothes as Friday, clearly unwashed. My stomach dropped when I saw him. As poor as she was, I knew his mom to be a pristine type of woman who kept her child well-groomed, if threadbare. I asked him if he'd been sleeping well when I gave him his sandwich. Since I hadn't heard from Mrs. Collins, I kept bringing him lunch every day just in case. Not really. My mom keeps telling me to sleep in my own bed, but I fell asleep last night after she sang to me in her room. "Oh, did you get to sleep in your mom's bed?" I asked hopefully. "No, I fell asleep on the floor outside her closet." "What were you doing on the floor next to the closet?" I asked nervously. "Well, she sings to me through the closet door. Her voice is real quiet now, so I get close. I guess I fell asleep on accident, 'cause that's where she woke me up this morning." I was speechless. Charlie must have seen the panic flit across my face, because he looked upset suddenly. "It's okay, Miss B. I promise. I'll sleep in my own bed tonight, and I'll sleep better." He sounded desperate. "My mom says I'll be fine. I just have to help her take good care of me." I reassured Charlie and sent him off to recess, but I decided that I would have to talk to his mom in person that day. I couldn't keep trying to deal with this quietly, and I was worried that the situation was getting out of hand quickly. What did he mean? Through the closet door? I walked Charlie home that afternoon. He was silent for most of the walk, a stark contrast to the other time we'd walked hand in hand together, when he spent the entire time regaling me of the latest Saturday morning cartoons. When we reached his front door, he produced the key on a chain around his little neck and deftly inserted it in the lock, like the experienced latchkey kid he was. It was when he pushed the door open that it hit me. Rot. That was what I had smelled on his sweater this week. It was the smell of roadkill, of a butcher shop dumpster. It was the smell emanating from the little bungalow where I stood on the threshold. Charlie walked right into the house, like he didn't notice the oppressive wall of scent pushing me backwards towards the sidewalk. "Mom," he called out inside. I held my coat sleeve over my nose and pushed forwards behind him. "Mom, Miss B is here." Silence. The house was completely still, save for the buzzing of a single fly in the kitchen. Charlie walked through the living room and the kitchen to the short back hallway. I crept warily behind him. "Mrs. Collins," I called out hesitantly. I scanned the kitchen for the source of the smell, but saw nothing. "I'm so sorry to intrude. I just wanted to speak to you directly." I labored to breathe through my mouth, the smell becoming more intense as I moved further into the house. "She's in here," Charlie informed me, but she told me I wasn't allowed to come into the closet with her. "Charlie," I instructed, my voice wavering, "will you go outside and sit on the sidewalk for me? I want to talk to your mom for a second. Just us grown-ups, okay?" He hesitated. I smiled at him, trying to hide my fear and my overwhelming disgust. He glanced at me, and into the bedroom, and back at me again. "All right." He left the room and went back towards the front door, looking back at me several times. I stood in the hallway, doing my best to look cheerful. "Mrs. Collins," I called out again, taking a deep breath through my mouth. My stomach lurched, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand at attention as I crossed the threshold into the bedroom. "Mrs. Collins," I practically whispered, facing the slatted white doors of the closet. Nothing. The room was silent, save for the rushing of my blood in my ears. I stared into the dark gaps between the wooden slats. I felt as if there were eyes on me, burning as they returned my gaze, but I saw nothing. As quick as I could, I pushed down my terror and whipped open the door. "Are you Miss Bell?" the officer asked. I looked up at him from where I sat on the Frouncin lawn, my arm around Charlie. I nodded, staring back at my shoes on the edge of the sidewalk. "Yes, I'm the one who called." I heard the rattle of the gurney as the EMTs brought it through the front door. I pressed Charlie's head into my shoulder, so he couldn't turn to see. I squeezed my own eyes shut. I had seen enough already. A female officer took Charlie from me and sat him in the back of a squad car. I sat still on the cold grass, feeling the ice slowly melt into my polyester work slacks. "You said you spoke to his mother yesterday evening?" the officer questioned, standing in front of me on the broken concrete squares. "No," I said. "Charlie spoke to his mother yesterday evening. I called the house on Thursday and she didn't pick up. Everything was relayed to me through him." "Okay, and when did Charlie say his father took off?" "Saturday before last. I found out that Monday." I swallowed hard. Silence hung in the air as I watched the red and blue lights bounce off the houses before I spoke again. "How long do you think she was in there?" The officer let out a long breath through his teeth. The scent of Mrs. Collins still hung in the air with the front door left open. "My best guess, 2 weeks." I nodded again, shutting my eyes but quickly opening them again. Every time I closed my eyelids, I saw her there, her eyes wide open and hollow, her mouth agape, her dry fingers wedged in her husband's belt, her flesh peeling wetly off the bone, her feet hovering above the ruined carpet, the remnants of a housekeeper's crisp uniform, stained beyond bleaching. The envelope with my handwriting, soaking in red and brown. I changed schools that fall. I wasn't sure I could handle another year in that neighborhood, driving so close to Charlie's house every morning and every evening. I didn't think I had the stomach to help other students with their family struggles, having seen what I had seen that winter. I called Charlie's grandmother a few times to see how he settled in with her. 2 states away, I hoped that he was young enough to forget and move on with time. It was better he was far away, where his father wouldn't know to look, if he ever cared to. The police weren't able to find the man as far as I know, and I pray every day that he's dead in a ditch somewhere. What kind of a man could do that to his wife, and then leave his son alone with the aftermath? It made me sick with rage and sadness. I left another letter for Charlie's mum, this time on her grave. I hope she knows that he's being looked after when she couldn't. God knows she tried her hardest. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, The shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.